Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Billy.
Yeah, and the slides aren't showing up, Michelle.
Yeah. Give me
There we
just a
go.
second.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you for your help with this, by the way.
Okay, there we go.
All right, so today we're going to talk about AI, and to be honest, I would love this to be a conversation with everybody. I have a lot of different key points that I tried to kind of, beyond just having what we have on the slides, really trying to kind of pull out some different real life examples and how this might look for each of us. A little bit about me. I started as kind of a techie. I worked for Apple Computer in the late 90s, early 2000s. I went into IT and into systems engineering and worked with some startups in the Bay Area and was in charge of all their accounts west of the Mississippi River. So, working in technology has always been something that's been interesting to me. I was definitely one of those kids that grew up with a computer around and played around with it a lot, and ultimately a big part of my day to day outside of doing business development and marketing stuff is actually working with APIs and developers, and looking at how different systems can integrate and work and evolve together. So AI inevitably is a part of that, just because it's a big part of the conversation. Like, I don't know if any of you all were around for South by Southwest, but I swear every other person I met that was there for South by Southwest did something with AI. So it is a part of our landscape, whether we like it or not. I think a lot of it is is fluff, certainly, because there's like AI for ridiculous things. But I think there's a big portion of it that we need to look at in our conversation. So a little bit about Just Mind, just to kind of give a little background to that for those of you all that may not be familiar with us. My wife and I run Just Mind together. We have around 50 clinicians. We have north and south locations in Austin. And how I think about technology is really thinking on ultimately what's going to go and create kind of quality care for our clients and clinicians. And how do we do this in a way that's thoughtful? And I think that's part of the challenge that we run into with going into this conversation is like some of this stuff is not going to be implemented in a way that's best for us because ultimately these things are going to be focused on the outcomes that they want. So yeah, so if you want to go ahead and move it to the next slide, we can do that. So part of the issue within this is truly data privacy and training models. And a big thing to think about within this is bias and how does that come up within these models. So you can look at certain examples. I don't know how many of you all were paying attention to this stuff, but the data that's fed into these models really can pose like a risk in the way that it's interpreted, understood, and output. For an example, like you can look at like Google started going and pulling in a bunch of different data from Reddit. And Reddit has a lot of nonsense in it. For those of y'all that are not familiar with Reddit, there's a ton of nonsense that's in it. And so as a result, people were asking different questions of like Gemini, which is what Google uses for their this evolution of their AI, and it was sometimes telling people things that were like advocating self harm or things that were like actually harmful. And so Google had to manually get their engineers to go through these different flagged responses that ended up being highlighted by journalism and media and like trying to manually correct this stuff. And so that was a problem. And that's something to be aware of within this is just because all of these different platforms are absorbing all of this information from a lot of different areas. And there's no real safeguards that are in place and it's just not transparent. And so that's something that's a huge issue of looking at the training data because there could be things like imagine if an AI model that was focusing on therapy was using Truth Social as its like learning data, and not to go into anything that is in political in nature, but inevitably, if you're going into different, if you're having potential bias in your data set, it's something that can really further misunderstandings or can create stereotypes that are really problematic. And as therapists, I know that all of us are sensitive to that and working with our clients. But this is one of those things where it's a real significant threat to client confidentiality and ethical standards. And so it's something that we're going to have to be very aware of. And currently, there's just not anything kind of like, um, on the any kind of nutritional data that you see on packaging. We don't have any of that on AI. And so that's a really big problem because without that transparency, we aren't going to be as aware of all the different limits to client confidentiality that we need to be aware of. An example of that could be an AI that's used for notes that could be training different bots to be able to go and supply therapy. So that's something that may not be explicitly stated, but there's things like Wobot and stuff like that that are coming out that insurance is actually allowing to be billable at the moment. And it's a question of has where was the consent that was given for all of that training data? And could that be going into bad directions? Like, for instance, surveillance, workplace monitoring, data leaks. An example of that actually is there was a EMR that was in Northern Europe that it actually it was compromised and all of the different client records were exposed. So it's a huge concern just because there were some people that actually committed suicide or died by suicide, I just say more correctly, sorry, that died by suicide as a result of their different records coming forward. And so that's something to be aware of, that these things have realistic like ways to be able to harm people. And so there's a concern around certainly the security as well as the need for confidentiality and just even the things that we're not thinking about. Like in the other room, we have an old Alexa Spot or Dot or whatever it's called. And as of the 28th of this month, that thing, you cannot make it private. So for the therapists that have that in their office, that may not be a way that you're thinking of with AI, but you may be like, hey, this little thing, it's great because it's in my waiting room and it like plays music and it doesn't cost me anything, or it always keeps the accurate time and I don't have to worry about changing it. But that's actually going, and so it's always on. You can't set it to private after the 28th of this month. And so there are little things like that that we may not be even aware of that are kind of always siphoning data from us and everyone around us and learning. And that can create really, really big problems for not only us, but our clients. Because imagine like what exactly is happening with all of that different data that it's absorbing in the background of a session or things like that. And it's tricky just because the question is, where does all of this go? And my personal feeling is companies like Amazon, like they absolutely are going to enjoy having this because there's a lot of data that's explicitly out there to be clear. Like Google actually goes and buys around 80% to 90% of the credit card volume. So they know like all of the data around people. So they'll go and they'll buy it from Visa and Amex and things like that to try and understand more user behavior data because they want to get as much as they can. But the challenge comes when these systems all start connecting, like for instance, you buy a book on depression and then all of a sudden next to that, it's a click to go into a discounted Prime membership to be able to get, either a therapist from that, or even something that's like a chatbot supported thing to be able to help you with your mental health at a low or no cost that's included in your Prime membership. So these are all different things that I have concerns around the ways that this stuff may look over time. Like I said, PHI being released, personal conversations being exposed, you look at also the concern around realistically us continuing to be therapists. I will say first and foremost, I don't think therapists are going away. I think in the future, we're going to see a continuing increase for the need of it. I have concerns about like how insurance companies ultimately may try and force different user behavior because they're kind of jerks and they're focused on profitability first and foremost. So, but like no doubt we're seeing this right now. Like if you went downtown around South by Southwest, you saw the Waymo self-driving cars. First they were on their own, now they're partnering with Uber. You're seeing this different stuff happen in that realm. No doubt we'll see this first probably in areas like BetterHelp, and then kind of going into things like if you look at like Wobot and Visa, which is another one. These things are ultimately also looking at how can they potentially replace therapists. No doubt that
Billy,
there's
can I make a comment real quick about
sure.
that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to interject about the therapists are not going away comment is just
Yeah.
remembering that who we are as therapists. And I know Cyan and Linda Michaels is here in our session today, and they're doing a lot of work around really promoting depth psychotherapy and depth psychology, that those are things that cannot be replicated by bots. And that, you think about some of the tools that are coming out, or even the old things like CBT, EMDR, those things are that very protocol
Yeah.
heavy modalities. Those are going to be the first to be replaced, right? Like those are going to be the things that they think that they can replicate. And so just remembering who we are as therapists, that the tools that we use are tools, just that. But it's really about our relationship, the trust we build with our clients, who we are as people, how we co-regulate with our clients, just kind of getting back to who we are as therapists, I think is really important. And I just want to pause and just see if we have any questions, or if any, you can raise your hand or say something in the chat, and I'll make sure to call on you as we go. Do you want me to move to the next slide, Billy?
Yeah, we can go ahead and go to that.
Okay. I didn't, are you, I just want to make sure you're okay, because we have a few to get through.
Yeah.
And some of this, like, I think this is what kind of what you might be talking about now, but
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess the few other things that I'll say kind of in this vein are like, we've got to be aware of the different things of like what information is going to be shared with insurance or life insurance companies. And the concern is like ultimately what is happening with this data, right? How explicitly open is this stuff? So for instance, like with Headway, like they've come forward and Headway has said, that they are working on all of this different stuff for outcome focused care. They're trying to invent a new model for outcome focused care because ultimately, like insurance companies want to go and cut down on the cost, right? And so they're trying to partner and share as much data with them, and they've actually gotten in trouble for some of the different data that they've shared. But the concern is when you have all of this stuff that's outcome focused care that's there and utilizing whether it be AI or a variety of other different data that they're sharing, is like, how does it keep us being like having our proper autonomy? An example of that that's already in play is Lyra, which is some of you all may know, it's an EAP. They will not allow you to do play therapy with kids. And that's absolutely insane to me. But they're like, yeah, it's not evidence based. So we want you to sign this form, not only saying that you won't do it, but like if we find any evidence of it, we will do clawbacks for everything on that. So that's kind of scary, right? When you start seeing these different platforms that initially, seem really friendly, and then over time they stop being as friendly because ultimately it's like any company, it's you're thinking of like what is the outcome that you're growing towards, and they want to go and look at and see how can they be more appealing to the payers, the health insurance companies or otherwise, or even potentially become like payer sources themselves in the future. And so the thing that they're trying to use as their negotiated bargaining chip is, on one hand, it's wonderful. I don't mean to diminish Alma, Headway, the BetterHelp. All these things can potentially increase accessibility for clients. So I don't mean to like stomp all over that and say that that's a bad thing, because it's not. I just think the challenge there needs to be the transparency that's there. And I think that clinicians need to be a part of the focus conversation about what are the long-term goals of these different platforms. Just because currently that's the thing with Headway and Alma is they aren't profitable, just like Uber was in its very early days. Until you hit a very large market share, these things like are losing money. And so they're just constantly having venture capital and private equity dumping money into them to try and make it so that over time they get so big that, kind of like Uber in its early days, it was a really great deal for the different drivers that were there because they would give them 80 to 90% of the revenue. Now it's being found that the majority of the drivers with Uber are earning less than minimum wage. And so I'm not saying that therapists are going to go and become Uber drivers and be, like completely out of work or anything like that. I'm just trying to say that we need to be a part of the conversation and looking at these different things that are kind of changing our field. And no doubt, as these different things, as Headway approaches 100,000 subscribers across the country, they're going to have significant market share. And as they do that, it may be initially great in thinking like, all right, well, they're getting better rates. The thing is that doesn't sustain. And when I've talked with everybody in private equity in that area, that is one of the things that they have is like an across the board thing is the monetization model of these different platforms. It's not sustainable. So they're going to have to go and change it. And so it's looking at kind of all of these different things from and how they might affect us in the future. And I don't mean to get too lost in the monetization discussion since we're really focusing on um, the other parts of this and data and privacy and AI and how all of that comes together. But so, these automated systems that are like, let's say we're going and using them for our notes, which I totally get it. Being somebody with ADD myself, I can totally 100% like appreciate that there could be AI that could be in the corner listening to my session and documenting that and doing it for me. The challenge is with this stuff, it's like, it's all of this stuff, it's like right around the corner for all of us. And it's the Open Notes Act. The Open Notes Act, it's what if you take insurance, if you use an EMR, all of this stuff, there is a requirement that your notes have to be in there and your clients can see it. I believe it's within 24 hours. And anybody can correct me if I'm wrong in that, but it's either end of the day or 24 hours. And that also means that insurance companies are absolutely going to go. And as you submit a claim, they're going to review the note with AI and dispute it. They're going to be looking for things that are contextual, like for instance, does that note maybe mention family or like a partner that's there and it was billed as individual therapy and then they refuse it and then start an audit of your practice? Again, these are all just things that can easily happen, but it's things to be aware of. And also potentially they even just deny care because they're like, hey, our AI didn't think that person sounded depressed. We don't think they meet criteria for depression, which that's also kind of insane because like how are you just going to judge that from tone? It's missing all of the physical cues, all the things that were in the room with that person on. But no doubt, those are different things that come up. So these automated systems, there's a lot of challenges within that. There's, like it says actually on this slide, it's, there's cultural sensitivities, there's all these context specific things that are going to be missed. The human element of having that therapist in the room is going to be really important. However, we have to, and I'm going to push more on this towards the end of this, of all the importance of advocacy in this realm. I do have a lot of concerns about lowering fees within our realm. There are a lot of people that, like, if you look at some of the like thought leaders in the space, they absolutely will say that of feeling like there's going to be a de-skilling that happens in the future of our practice area. And that's something that I have a lot of concern about because insurance companies are going to see what they can do to try and push down rates across the board. Right now, there's like the highest rate for somebody in Texas. Interestingly, there's an LCSW that's earning somewhere around $280 an hour for 90837. And that's an interesting point to note that there's this huge variability, and like nobody would know that unless you had access to these huge data sets. Insurance companies are required to make this publicly available, but they make it as big of a pain in the butt as possible. You have to have like cloud computing capabilities with terabytes of data and storage, and then you have to have like backgrounds and Jupyter Notebook and Python and all these things just to try and distill it. But over time, that information, since it is publicly available, people are going to see like, oh wait, this market pays better than this market, this pay, and all of that stuff as we go and have these cross-state licensing things that come into play is going to make it so that that's broken down, and insurance companies are going to want to go and make it so that there's like universal payments across all markets. They're absolutely leveraging towards that because they don't want to have all of these different contracts that are everywhere that they could potentially pressure down those different costs. And or it's like you have let's say Arkansas or New Mexico, those are two different markets that are also somewhat void of therapists, and so as a result that the fees can be higher in those markets. That will go away with cross-state licensing, just because no doubt the insurance companies are aware of that. And also, even if there is like a higher reimbursement market, insurance companies are buying their own networks. Like that's what happened with Refresh. They bought, it was around 3 or 4 thousand therapists across the country. United purchased that. And then that allowed them to cost control and be like, all right, no longer we'll just self-refer on all these different clients and control the cost on our mental health stuff. Anyway, not to get too off on that, that's another conversation. I want to pause and see if anybody has any questions on this so far. Michelle, do you mind monitoring that for me and letting me know?
Yes. You want, Yes. So how are companies like Headway and BetterHelp using algorithms to look at matching clients and therapists and other back end elements of the business?
So currently, the concern, if you've looked at it, because I try and not just be kind of one of these people that's like bashes on these things and doesn't actually pay attention to what they're doing. They've been sending out different emails focusing on how they're focusing on outcome-based care, and their thing that they're promising to the payers is trying to focus on having an assessment on the way in, an assessment through people's treatment, and focusing on ultimately how do truly are these people improving? Because all of us know if we just do a GAD-7 and a PHQ-9, that's not going to show whole person health. There's a variety of different things that we can try and use to assess, but it's really hard to tell truly like how much better is somebody functioning at the end of their care. And ultimately, that's the golden standard that insurance companies would like is something that's truly assessing for that. But that also then means that it's going in the direction of they want to be able to understand that so they can then only compensate for that. Because that's value-based reimbursement, which is like a whole other conversation that we could have. But we see value-based care kind of being this big thing that's already happening in the medical space. And to give kind of the short summary of it, insurance companies are trying to go and reward the doctors and primary care people that get people better and with higher rates because our current model is based solely on transactional stuff, right? So it's like, let's say there's a knee doctor, the simplest example that I can give. You have a knee problem, he goes in, he does his thing, he gets you better. It on average takes him 4 visits versus the other guy that ends up seeing you for like 6 months and people are not having the same outcomes. I get it in that space. Like maybe that guy is an incredible or person, I should say, to be more inclusive in my language here. Maybe that person is truly a better physician in treating people and they're on to something that needs to be done. The challenge comes in our space when we start seeing it dictate how we can perform care. And that is the thing that truly concerns me. And I think we should all be concerned about. Because if we start going into situations where they're like, yeah, you can only do EMDR for like these types of things and not that. If you do that and we find it in your notes, and then you're you have a problem. Or even potentially requiring that AI be in the room with you for all of your notes to be rewarded at a higher session, at a higher rate. So all of these things are kind of things that we'll need to be paying attention to and looking at just because I get that being somebody that like appreciates technology, I should say that as well. I understand that there are these phase shifts that we can go through. And in
Billy,
our
I'm
profession,
sorry, Billy, can I
yeah,
interject before you get
yeah,
too
yeah,
far
yeah,
down the road?
absolutely.
A few people asked if you could clarify the part that United bought something.
So they bought Refresh. If you Google Optum Refresh, it was a large acquisition that happened a couple of years ago, and it's one of the many different roll-ups that's happened in our space. And this isn't something that's unique. It's like kind of like the Smile Dentals popped up everywhere, and that was just them buying different practices and rolling them into something bigger. Refresh was something that was done by United slash Optum, and it was designed in a way to really help them control cost, and they can self-refer. So if you Google Refresh, you can see like Refresh slash Optum. You'll be able to see more information about it. But this is one of those things that they're doing to try and control their own landscape because they'd rather go and pay a therapist like 60,000 a year or 50,000 a year and then start putting in mandates on metrics of like you need to see 30 or 40 clients a week, we'll give you a 2% raise per year. Controlling all of that internally, then it helps them to control that cost. So they don't have to then pay Headway. They don't have to then pay Alma. And actually, that was part of, and you're seeing some of these things start to happen where payer rates are drastically changing. Like BCBS in Florida cut their pay for 90837 by $40. Recently, we've seen some different payer cuts actually specifically focused to that refresh thing that actually affected, I believe it was Alma and Headway, because they had rate reductions that came in from United. So
Billy,
it's,
we have some more questions coming
yeah, yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
Someone
Sure.
asked, there's a few. So the first one is, can they do clawback for private pay when someone uses their out of network for reimbursement? I don't
That's a
know.
good question. I
Yeah.
haven't encountered that. I I don't want to comment on that because I haven't encountered it. It doesn't mean that it couldn't potentially happen. That's a good question. That would be like I would probably put in an insurance forum on Facebook and see what other people say.
Yeah.
Um, so because I feel like inevitably the insurance companies are good at clawing back money in a variety of ways. So I don't want to I don't want to
Yeah.
discount their ability to potentially do that because like absolutely they probably can.
Yeah. Are there, and also that, insurance companies are using AI algorithms and that's been a lot in the news. And so there's a lot of mistakes that can happen there and a lot of,
Yeah. Yeah, there was the instance of it was United came for they had an AI that they were using that was denying like 90% of claims and they knew it was faulty and they didn't care. So they
yeah.
got sued over it and ultimately all of this came out. I thought either in The Verge or Ars Technica, but it was like a huge thing where they were like, "Yep, we don't care." Like
Yeah. And
until they catch us.
someone asked Texas rules for counselors about the use of AI, consent forms, et cetera. I want to just comment on this because there are so many forums now, ethics forums. I know NASW Texas and NASW National actually has hosted Frederick Reamer, who wrote the Code of Ethics for NASW, has very, very well versed in AI and what things to consider. So I would look for those AI, I mean those ethical AI forums where what you should kind of know about what's coming down the pike. Because I think that's way too much for us to cover in this and this is not an ethics presentation, but I do think that we all need this is really just kind of making us aware that we all need to be aware of these things. And to that point, someone asked, do we need to be more aware to what extent AI is in our consulting room versus our digital services? And then there's one more question after that, Billy.
Yeah, so I do think that it's important to try and be aware of different systems and how people are doing stuff. And hopefully in the future we can have more bills that are I don't have any immediate hope for this because I feel like every like regulation is being stripped down to the bones. But actually, it's surprisingly as frustrating as Texas can get in certain ways. I do think that they actually care around certain things of keeping independence within our realm and there are some bills that are coming forward around that just because there are certain legislators and representatives that like totally get like what happens when Walmart comes to town and like kills all the small people in their businesses. And so there is a sensitivity to that. So that is one advantage that we do have of having some people that are specifically with rural areas. So some of those same people that are representatives of us like are very open to that conversation, and that's something that we're going to need to continue to have them be involved in pushing that forward for our own independence in this. So, for instance, like I'm actually a firm believer that I think all therapists, if we work for practices, they need to be also a majority owned by a therapist. I think having it these different roll ups that are happening around the country of where these things are owned by venture capital or private equity, and it's like run by some dude that's from Deloitte and has a background in audit and has no background in mental health. That's not good for us because like that dude's or person's perspective is totally going to be focused on like what makes the most number sense and supposed to like what's best care. And so that's a big concern that I have. So
Billy, someone
yeah,
asked, are there resources to know what companies are being used to train AI models? I think sometimes the hardest thing is trying to find out company policies to safeguard clients' information.
so that may be something I need to send a follow up out about. There's somebody, Rob Reinhardt is one guy that he has person centered tech. And they do a lot of discussion around this kind of stuff and are a really wonderful resource um, and on a variety of different things. Person-centered tech, they even have like an audit thing of looking at like how HIPAA compliant is all your stuff. There's a variety of things that they do. I'm not affiliated with them, just to be very clear. But talking about technology and the interaction, there's somebody that is definitely involved in that. And they might be a good resource for you. But I can also look at other things. I know Rob personally, and I can try and see about additional things that could be helpful for you in that. That's a really great question. Thank you for asking that. Is there another question you said?
Um, does Texas have rules or standards at all on AI?
I think it's catching a lot of people off guard. And to be honest, I think there's concern around it in a broad way in Texas. I think all the legislatures are trying to get their like arms around it. I don't know of the status of all the different bills on that, but I do think that it's something that's like that NASW and all of the other different organizations are being aware of and trying to work on advocacy around. I think the challenge is also like I think focusing your efforts because when I look at the different things that NASW and TCA are doing, there's so many different things that are all important. But I have seen several different bills around AI in the Texas legislature that are focused on um, better protections. But I don't know that them off the top of my head.
Yeah,
So your
one
question,
is I know one is around that a licensed therapist has to be involved in
mhm.
the service delivery when AI
Yeah.
is involved. That's one of the bills being considered, and there's another one, and I don't remember what that one is. But I just want to make a plug. Like, there's a lot of people in the room, and I would imagine most of you are NASW members. But if you're not,
Yeah.
NASW is a great place. I mean, it is a place to be connected to for these types of issues. And
Yeah,
Brian,
NASW, I can't say enough positive things about. It's like I'm an LPC, but I absolutely give a huge plug to NASW and being open to the conversation, looking at a
yes.
variety of things they can do. Will Francis and all of them, they're incredible. And I've never seen anybody that does more for our field. And that's not to knock TCA or AMT or any of the others. I think it's all important, but NASW is just has such activism and is such a welcome partner in the conversation. It's great, and I hope they all like are absolutely. I will also say that my own background, I've had more affiliation with them and TCA than I have with the others. So,
Yeah. And
um,
anyone can join. You don't have to be a
yep.
social worker to join NASW. And the benefits of membership are Brian Metis, who is the lobbyist for NASW Texas. You know, members can reach out directly on issues that if you are aware of something happening or something going on, you can reach out directly. I mean, all of their work is member directed. So it
Yeah,
is,
they're extremely responsive. Like Allison and all the different people, like Allison's now with Hog, but they all work tightly together with Texas Coalition of Healthy Minds, trying to go and push different policy that helps all of us in mental health in Texas. So a couple quick things, and then we can transition from the slide. I'm a huge fan of fantasy and sci-fi, and so part of it is I do appreciate kind of dreaming it forward and looking at how these things could evolve in a way that's like helpful and meaningful. Like anybody that's read Orson Scott Card, like Ender's Game and the subsequent books, there's interesting interactions with AI that happens there, and you can see the potential for there being something in the future that's like assisted where there's this kind of supervisors and consultants role, which is what this slide mentions in this, and that's kind of a way of where technology may do some or AI may do some grunt work and catch different things. Like for instance, a vital thing that I haven't seen this happen, but it's like I think about this kind of stuff. It's like when somebody's doing billing and let's say it's after 5 o'clock, there's a code that you can do as an add-on code with a number of insurances that can help you to earn extra money if you have that negotiated in your contract. And it could be helpful if it automatically flags that and it's like, hey, you were submitting this 90837. Did you actually mean to add on this modifier for this since it's after your normal business hours or on a weekend or something like that? So there's things like that where it could actually be helpful in catching different stuff like that. And no doubt, like I'm saying, the insurance companies, they could use it in this crappy way to kind of be the man kind of stomping down on us. But EMRs have an opportunity there too to fight back and be like, and I'm sure they will charge us for this, but to have like built in like AI that's like, hey, we noticed your note says this and you have this coded this way. Do you mean to actually also add this so it doesn't get flagged for audit or any potential worry in the future? So there's things like that that can almost be like viruses and antiviruses, and no doubt these things I think will go that way in the future. They also potentially could help with training. It's like somebody that I will say I have enjoyed learning EMDR and I appreciate my supervision with Rick. But is it possible that like EMDR could potentially help me with some of my own training in that? Maybe it could show me like, hey, in this session you could have had a call back here and return to target or something like that. That's something that may be helpful in the future. There could be different ways as long as those different things are like transparent in the way what's happening with that data, I think it's important. Like there was an example, Heidi AI, which is one of the ones that's thought of as a really helpful AI for notes and documentation. There were several very public examples of where people went and like to plug in their note from Heidi AI, and it totally got a conversation that was not part of a therapy session. And it was like the person was like, "What in the hell is going on with this thing?" And there's also just the challenge. Like I don't know if any of you use like Google Meet, for instance, you can now have it like go and transcribe your conversations. And if you look at that transcription, some pieces of it are totally like gibberish. And I'm like, how is this awful? Like Google, this is terrible. How is this even a feature? And some of them are better, but it's the concern being like, what does it then miss between like, is it hearing everything in the room? How well is this truly happening? There's a lot of concerns about accuracy with that. They keep working on it, no doubt, because that's the standard that all of them are working for. But I could see AI being helpful with mood tracking, helping with scheduling or rescheduling, note summary, so that when we're coming up on a session at a glance, AI might be helpful in kind of reviewing the different things that are important with billing help, like I said. Possibly there are some things like in the CBT chatbot area that could be great. I was part of a call with some different resources that are nationwide for different nonprofits and looking at those that are really high need populations. And could you use a CBT chatbot to be able to help people that are really in a bad place, and at least it gives them something? Or maybe it trains that person that's out in the field with some basic techniques to be able to help them to be able to provide some level of support for a community that might not be able to get it at all. So, no doubt, there's things that are there that I think are important to be considered and be a part of the conversation, as long as there's like transparency and we understand what's going into this. Because again, it's like if there's an AI that's trying to help somebody that has like horrible implicit bias or horrible bias within it, that could be really like chilling and terrifying. And we see this different stuff. All of us know about what happens in medicine and how even research and so much of medicine is centered around men and like how woefully deficient that is. But these are the things that happen in our society. And no doubt, this is the same stuff that happens in the training of our different algorithms and AI. So, Michelle, we can actually go on to the next
Okay,
slide.
and I want to make a
Sure.
I wanted to interject something that the Academy of Therapy Wisdom is a group that does a lot of they do a lot of CEUs and training, but they did a webinar recently, and they it was around the protecting the soul of therapy, which is everything that we're talking about. And they put out an integrity statement that I will forward to you, Laura, so you can send out to the listserv. Um, and I'll send it to you, Billy, too, so and it can be posted on Just Minds. But this is something that every professional can use. And I know at Plumeria, we're going to put this on our website, but it's just a statement around why local independent care is important and why it's important to know your therapist, to kind of move away from transactional relationships with therapists and into back to, your therapist is a relationship. This isn't just, oh, I don't like this person, I'm going to go to somebody else, or this, I'm just going to go somebody based on my insurance. It's like it's a relationship. And it is important to find that good fit, but we're not a commodity, you know. So
Yeah, because
I'll send that out.
I think it's important to look at like doctors very often. It's like my wife used to work at a medical clinic, and without going into specifics of it, there was a big argument within that medical clinic because they were like, why can't somebody just see a different therapist each time? And so it's a very different view of like the importance of the relationship, the importance of that stuff. And so like that's an important piece to put out there because it isn't transactional that way.
Yeah.
So, and it can feel that way in the age of Talkspace and BetterHelp and all of that stuff. And there's a lot of pending litigation actually around all of that. I don't want to spend time really going into that too deeply, but like BetterHelp and Talkspace have been like really like negligent because they took on these huge contracts in Los Angeles and different school districts. And there's all sorts of different reports coming of like people that have been paying for care and that are not getting it. And it's just falling through the cracks of that system. And there's litigation pending around that. We were talking with David Rudd about that because he's one of the different psychologists that's being pulled in as part of the litigation on that. And then, Headway and Alma, there's a wide belief that they will ultimately be sued and fail because they're going and moving further and further in the direction of being an employer and requiring more and more stuff. and in which case they will be sued. And whatever replaces them will probably be better addressed to deal with that. But that is a huge thought within the field, is that what they're doing to try and move and further in a direction of making the insurance companies will also be the thing. And there is pending litigation with them around that as to whether they are like having a system that's like they're billing themselves as what's known as an MSO or a managed services organization, saying they just help with scheduling and billing and that stuff, and that's all they do. But the reality is they're more than that. And so that's a concern. But anyway, so that's not VR. So let me get back to that. This is my own ADD right there. So apologize about that.
Yeah, and
Um,
one more thing is
sure.
someone had a question is can AI assist with measurement-based care?
So yeah, it's a. I'm going to circle back to that because there are different things that are attempting to do that, and it depends on how it's implemented. Because no doubt, like everybody's trying to do that. Let me circle back to that though.
Okay.
Um, So with VR, this is kind of a brief thing that I'll say in this. I think that there's good potential within this, no doubt. That could be helpful for remote populations. You know, people, I work with a lot of clients that are on the spectrum in my own practice. I could see this being something that would be appreciated within various populations, potentially could be helpful in an experiential way. As we're looking at more things like Starlink and satellite connected high speed internet everywhere, more things like this do open up. And certainly, I think that we're seeing certain generations that are much more open to VR and AI. It's like I was talking with a therapist about their kids, and they were saying like their youngest two are using ChatGPT absolutely for therapy. And they were like, the therapist was surprised by this and was like, why are you doing this? I'm a therapist. I own a therapy practice. Why wouldn't you go to a therapist? And they were like, well, it's just more private to me. And so it's that reminder of like, how does all of this stuff continue to evolve and how does this potentially affect our field? My hope is that it helps to raise awareness levels instead of it being a sheer replacement for therapy, just like we've seen this continual evolution of like, let's look at like news media. It started with papers, it went to like television and radio, and now we're seeing like just this incredible abundance of podcast and every other form of thing that we can, because it's just spiraled. There's more and more and more and more. So I think that we'll see more of that stuff happen. It's just hoping that, and hopefully it'll be something that I guess lowers the barriers to people seeking care and maybe increases awareness of where they might need support. So that could be something that's helpful. And again, the concern is what do these different things do with all of that training data and what could happen with that? Because as we're going into this era of operator agents where we can, have ChatGPT go and not just be like, hey, book me a restaurant somewhere downtown, the places I like. I need something at 5 for 3 people, make it Italian. And it'll just do it. It'll go ahead in the background and then it'll like just get you to hit confirm. But the concern being like, again, like what happens if this like goes badly, whether that's like bad actors getting access to all of that data or what have you. But anyway, VR, I think it could be helpful. I can see it absolutely too with some of the COVID kids that are more in that, I think, not completely failure to launch range, but people that I think are definitely in that zone of not pushing themselves and kind of to get out of their comfort zone and doing a lot more stuff virtually anyway. So I could see that potentially being helpful in some ways as long as they don't become overly reliant on it. And that's something that I think all of us need to look at of like as these different technologies come in, is this something that's more helpful for clients and for us? Because it's like I know having done virtual EMDR during COVID, I also felt personally a little bit myself when I went back to in person. I was a little nervous, and we can become reliant on these different tools, and we just want to make sure that we don't, de-skill ourselves by having these different things that we utilize and maybe overly utilize them. We can go on to the next slide, Michelle.
Okay. And just to be mindful of time, we have about 8 minutes.
Okay. I will try and wrap this up quickly. So, as I've already said, the stuff about insurance companies, I think there's a greater chance for ethical dilemmas to come up within that. And I think we'll probably see a future too of where insurance companies start cracking down more on session limits of where they say, like, if you're going above 8 sessions, you need to have authorization for more. It's possible they may be like, but if you have AI in your sessions that's reporting everything to us, we may give you more easily. But ultimately, I think there's a challenge within that. They may use it as something that's for leverage. But I can absolutely see them looking for keywords and different notes and things like that. And for us doing more to prove that clients are doing better or worse. Michelle, we can go on to the next slide. So, protecting the future, this is kind of one of the most important things is education and advocacy. The therapist as the owner operator is going to be essential. So we really need to look and make sure that AI enhances rather than replaces ethical mental health care. We're going to need to make sure that AI policies aren't dictated by corporations and insurance companies, that it's clinicians that are the ones that are dictating that stuff. So, paying attention to bias in data sets, which this stuff is very hard to completely find at this current time. My hope is that that stuff will come. It's something that people have been pushing for greater guardrails that are there and greater transparency. But those are the things that we need to look for in language of different bills and advocacy efforts to have stronger protections for our clients and for us, to ensure that therapists have more oversight and over AI decision making. Um, and yet, yeah, too, to push the insurers to justify AI claim denials, to allow human appeals, because we could be looking at a future where it's like AI is completely like at the helm because insurance companies are like, hey, we just want to cut down the number of people that work for us and increase our profits. So like we're going to just make the first two levels of review human and make it really hard to get, or not human, AI, and make it very difficult to get to the human level of review. So licensing boards, they also need to have AI ethics training and continuing education to be able to talk about stuff like this. Because how we're talking about this today is just a snapshot of how things are, and it's going to continue to change really rapidly. I think about even my own use of AI in the past year, and it has changed a lot. And we're seeing it integrated into more and more products, whether we like it or not. Like Google Workspace being the most prime example, they enabled it for everybody trying to go and feed their stuff more data, even if it is HIPAA compliant in the version that you have, they're trying to go and build it in as second nature for people to use this stuff. So we need to demand transparency in any AI powered tools, about how it's being utilized. Sorry, I'm trying to be mindful of this since I know we just have a couple minutes. For other steps that you can take, yeah, advocate for laws requiring human oversight of any AI-driven healthcare decisions. Demand transparency for AI-powered reimbursement audits. Ensure that AI never replaces a therapist's professional judgment. That is such a huge concern that I have. Yeah, I would keep involved in the different discussions that NASW has around this, and just look for different things that, be curious with the tools that you use and be thinking like, hey, this tool that I'm used, if this is left unchecked, will this undermine my autonomy or my client privacy or, affect equitable care? So these are all the different things to be kind of aware of as we, go into these different um, these
Billy,
these
someone
different
asked if and how you're using AI in your own practice.
It's a good question. So there's different ways that I've used some different things, and to be honest, a lot of it's experimental. It's not something where I'm using it with a notes perspective, but no doubt there's a part of me that looks at that because, like, I was talking with a practice up in Maine that's like, yeah, we chronically have some therapists that run behind the notes, like, should this be something that we're considering, for this, and what are the concerns about it? And so it's like I totally get like the potential for helping somebody that chronically runs behind with that. I'm not saying we don't do that, to be clear, but there are those things that we're absolutely always thinking of, like what is the standard? How is this? Because I mean, if you notice, like Therapy Notes just announced AI is in a simple practice is, like all of these different EMRs are building it in because they're like, hey, we can also make more money with this thing. Personally, I've been using it for some marketing related stuff. Sometimes I'll be writing an email and being like, this is the thought. How do I go and make this more clear? Because in my own brain, it's coming out in this gobbledygook way. Help me simplify this. And sometimes it's even just with like an idea generation. Like I'll have an idea about a service offering or something like that that we might do, and then I might actually have it go and model some of the financial modeling of it to be able to go and put that together of like basically if I have an idea on a concept that's something that we might offer to a business, then basically work through the feasibility of an offering like that. And then go ahead and then work through that on a spreadsheet basis on my own to make sure that that's actually it's being done in the right way. So there's a lot of different ways that I utilize it, but ultimately it comes across in kind of more of a marketing idea perspective. But I'm also very aware of, I think it's important for us to not always do this stuff because we need to have time to be bored and have ideas that come from boredom. And if we're always just turning to ChatGPT to like have it like, give us what we should do or should be thinking, that isn't as helpful. So like there's uh, what's his name? Will Newport, I think is his name. He's written several books on deep work is like ultimately the big one that he wrote, and talking about the importance of having boredom to be able to do kind of deep imaginative work. And I think that's also one of the challenges of AI is and also technology being all around us. And I'll be curious if in the future we may look back at this current time and be like, oh yeah, that was like
You
smoking.
know what, Billy? I made a mistake. We actually can go till 1:30. The presentation's till 1:30.
All right.
So we have time.
So
We
you
have
had me
time
like
for lots
spew
of
through all this
questions.
stuff so
Yes.
fast.
Yes.
Oh boy. Oh
I-
boy. Well, now I'm just completely blown
now
here.
you're like just keep going, keep rolling. I do
So
want to
I think
say,
we should probably open it up to some questions
yeah.
at this point.
And I do need to step out for just 2 minutes and I will be back. So I think if you want to ask a question, unmute yourself and and ask that question. And I will be right back. And I will when I come back, you can raise your hand. But I need to step out for a minute. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Actually, let me stop sharing the screen.
Let me also look through the questions in the chat. So Eden, I don't. This image is tiny. Oh, it was about a legislative thing. Um, yeah. uh
Hey, Billy, can I ask a question? Or
Yeah.
good to see you. Um,
Good to see you too.
so I am very particular about how I use AI. Lots of computer geeks around me. But what I don't know is, does ChatGPT have a listen availability like Facebook messages? Like I didn't download Facebook Messenger. What are the apps that are actively listening to you?
So, I mean, ChatGPT has a listen. If you go and you hit the like real time talk thing, but it also disables, right? So it's
It's
not running
disabled.
always in the background. The biggest one that's kind of coming online is actually the Alexa. Any product with Alexa as of March 28th will be listening all the time. It used to be that you could hit the privacy thing and then like ask Alexa a question only when you wanted to ask it a question, but they're disabling that entirely. So so to answer your question, as far as the audio stuff, that's something that I'm aware of only with that. On your iPhone and devices like that, it will also show you like when your microphone is activated and by what. So anyway, I wouldn't imagine any of those listening things would be running all of the time specifically with that. But there are the examples of where we need to be careful of it. Like we had a client that came in and he had some seemingly piece of jewelry that was like this little square or rectangular thing and working with one of our therapists, and then the therapist happened to just ask a question. It was like, hey, that's new, what's that? And it was an always listening thing, so that it took notes and everything he was doing all day long and gave him summaries of his day. And it was like I had never encountered that before, and I was totally surprised by that because I assumed that thing would also just destroy battery life doing that. But those are those things to be aware of. Like when we're having virtual sessions with people, we may not be aware of all the things that are in the background of their room, right? It's like at the beginning of COVID, there were so many firsts, I think, for all of us. It's like one of our therapists was like, oh my God, I think my clients were actually drinking and kind of hanging out in a session. I had to have a really weird conversation with them about this, but they didn't know. They were totally new to therapy. And they were like, yeah, I think we'll have a glass of wine and go to therapy and work through our problems. So you never know what's happening in the background. And it's that reminder to like try and be curious about it with clients of like, look, privacy is important to me. If you have an Alexa device, I don't know if you want it to be part of this. It's not HIPAA compliant. It's something that you may not want to have in your office or therapy or their own home if that's the case. But thinking about that different stuff because there are a lot of risk and they're continually evolving. Certainly, anything that you use within Google Workspace, they sign a BAA, so that's great. Just because we do know that that as a result creates a container for that stuff. However, when Gemini first came out, like it was not part of that, but it was added then later. So does that answer your question, Janet?
It does. And I'm actually I don't have echoes or dots or any of that kind of stuff because of that. But I've also taken the extra step that with smart TVs, because they're always listening as well, I've disconnected that. And I
Yeah.
don't know if people, that's why I don't have a smart home in that way. But it doesn't mean I don't have Siri. It doesn't mean I don't. But those are companies I trust a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing. That's the challenge. Like Apple's actually fallen way behind in some of that stuff in comparison to some of their competitors, but because of the desire to keep all of that siloed. And that's part of we don't have the protections that they do in Europe. The EU is definitely with GDPR and a variety of different protections that they put in place there. People have a lot more rights. So, like, that was the first place that you saw them have requirements around all of your Facebook data. All of your data must be siloed, and at any person's request, it can then be deleted. So that like immediately addressed it so many different things that like people had just because they had strong rights there. And like, revenge porn has been an awful thing that's plagued the US of like somebody had
Mhm.
an intimate moment that their, jerk partner decided to make public. And then all of a sudden it goes to all these different places. It's like to get that taken down for many, many years has been a huge pain in the butt. Versus in Europe, it's like, nope, that's not the case. And so that's the concern. I think in this current environment, it's challenging, but it's something that nonetheless is going to be important for people to try and push for, of having that to be clearly detailed. California has done some stuff as well to try and make there be more transparency around consumer rights and privacy. It's not to say that they're perfect. There's certainly still problems within their own laws, or so I've heard. And anyway, but it's something to be aware of, like within your home and how all of these different things may be affecting like your client's environment too. So
So, there's
Well,
another question I think about Headway. Linda Michaels had asked, what do therapists need to know about the mega group practices like Headway? Say more about these companies moving into the realm of being an employer, and is that different from the 1099 contractor relationship with therapists? I would like to say something about that if I
yeah,
could,
go ahead.
just before we go into Headway. But the challenge of places like Headway is, there. So if for those of you not familiar, Headway is a company that credentials therapists and supposedly offers referrals for higher insurance rates than what you would get through a independent group practice. So the reason they're able to pay higher rates is because they're backed by venture capitalists who can take a loss for up to 5 years. So that's very threatening to small group practices because we can't possibly compete with those types of rates. And it's kind of like what Billy was referring before is the Walmart model, is that they kind of like poach all those therapists and offer them these higher rates and then potentially put smaller businesses out of business, and now you're stuck, right? And now they're going to start lowering and clawing back those rates to probably rates that would be comparable to what you'd be getting through an independent group practice without any of the benefits. So you have none of the support that you would get from a community, none of the therapists really advocacy that happens like Billy and I offer through our group practices, that camaraderie, that support. So a lot of therapists coming right out of school getting their supervision, newly licensed new baby therapist say, oh, I can go with Headway and make, go insurance. They're going to give me all these referrals. And it's like, and then they realize they don't know what they don't know, right? Like you don't know
Yeah.
if you haven't been in practice, like what you don't know. And so there's a real risk that you're providing less than quality therapy. And also, you don't really have anywhere to turn when something happens. And frankly, they're over promising and under delivering. So most people that we've talked to say that Headway is not, they're not delivering on the referrals that they promise. So people are kind of dealing with the same things that you would deal with in a private practice, like that you just, where's the clients? Where's the clients? How can I get more clients? So
And it's so tricky just because there's a lot of different services that are trying to be these Ubers of therapy. It's not just Alma and Headway. There's Sonder Minds and a million others. And it's like unfortunate just because having talked with some of the different executives at these different companies, they're very excited about the new jets that they may be getting. They give a lot less of a crap about us at the end of the day. So it's really just focused on kind of ultimately like monetization models. And that's the thing. It's like all of these platforms view it as like, hey, if you give somebody a little bit of crack, they end up doing a lot of crack. It's kind of the thought. And it's like, or heroin or whatever you want to say. It's like, and that's the challenge. It's like these business models have a different end game, and all of them are modeled different ways. Like you mentioned the Walmart thing, and it's a reminder of CVS now has their option of doing therapy in store too. And they're looking at it from their monetization point of like, hey, when Bob comes in for his therapy session, he also picks up some cold medicine and maybe some like, I don't know, other stuff he doesn't truly need, but spends $40 in the store and comes to us. And, so it's a different monetization model where they can do it entirely. And like when you have the big companies, it's like what, like Amazon, Apple, all of these different companies collectively, it's like 8 million employees. So it's like there's a lot that they can do to like number one, start addressing their own different internal needs. Like Google like actually has psychologists in their offices now, as an example. So people are going to therapy. I was at my sci-fi fantasy book club, which again like points out my own nerdiness within this. But there was one of the people that was in there. I was like, yeah, I go to therapy regularly. And I was like, oh, who do you go to? And they're like, oh, the psychologist that's in my office. And no doubt those different platforms are looking at that utilization and looking at other ways to externalize that. So it's like I can totally see like, Amazon being that thing of where it's like after you buy that depression book, it then is like, hey, do you want to go ahead and schedule a session for $29 with one of our therapists? And it's just knowing that these platforms are very focused. If you look at, things, they're very focused on trying to have therapists do as many sessions as possible. And whenever you talk with anybody in private equity, they're always like, hey, why is it that therapists don't see 40 or 50 clients a week? It like blows their mind that somehow the norm in our profession is more like, 15 to 20 clients a week. And, they don't understand that. They don't appreciate that. And they absolutely want to figure out ways to like milk more out of all of us. And so that's something to be aware of within all of these different models is the challenges of what their end game is. So
Can,
anyway,
can I can I can we pause
yeah,
there? And I just want to ask Linda because you had asked like there was a second part to that question, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to say anything else about that.
Just, I mean, I think that, just along these same themes, I don't think therapists really know, I mean, I like what you're saying, but like the end game of these, their business models, their outcomes, their values are totally different. And I think, even the way
right on.
that those companies are structured now with therapists in a 1099 position, the therapists don't necessarily know that means you're really signing up to work like at a group practice, but you're not getting the benefits you would typically get if you worked at a local group practice. Like you're not getting health insurance, you're not getting a 401k, you're not, you're basically just getting maybe $10 more a session. I don't know.
And there's a term, I don't know if you've heard it, and pardon me if it sounds a little crude, but it's in-shitification. And in-shitification, it's like all of these different things that start one way and seem to deliver value, then they go in another that's just focused on monetization, and as a result, like it becomes crappier. It's like Facebook when it first started, I was like, oh, this is great. Like I can connect with all these people I haven't seen in a while, and then now it's just not serving ads nonstop And like, it's just all of this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
much of this has gone the direction where it's like not focused on our needs as much as it is making them more money,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know?
Linda, do you want to say something about Cyan and your work there, just so we have a good
Oh, yeah,
audience here?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Michelle. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I'm in private practice in Chicago, but I'm also the founder and chair of a nonprofit organization called Psychotherapy Action Network. And we basically have, I think it's a little over 6,000 members right now. Most of them are therapists. And we are really trying to advocate for the field, advocate for effective quality care, advocate for the principles that we know help people, like the relationship, and all these things that are really under threat by a lot of these greater forces that are focused on making more money or trying to turn uh, more work into more bits of data. And so we have a couple big projects. One is to educate the public on what they should expect from mental health care and what good mental health care should look like to them. We also have resources, and we have a whole page on our website about dealing with insurance and things like that. So resources for therapists. And then we also try to educate policymakers similarly. I know the whole policy world in DC is kind of um, doing its whatever it's doing these days, but trying to educate policymakers so that when they are thinking of funding or regulating insurance or whatever ways they intersect with our field, they also have some guideposts to keep in mind. So, that's kind of what we're doing, and it seems really aligned with what all that's been talked about here. And so I would, yeah, invite you guys to check us out, or please reach out to me.
Linda,
Um,
do you want to put a link to your website in the chat
I
for
just
people?
sure.
did.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
Michelle just did. Yep.
Oh, geez, already ahead of me. Yeah, I know that I've checked out your work and I really appreciate what you all are doing in the field. It's so important. Because I think ultimately it's like, I don't mean to scare people with what I'm saying or shock people or whatever. I think it's just important for all of us to be like looking at kind of how things might be changing in ways that we're not predicting, and to be a part of that discussion. Because it's like each of us are making decisions every day, and that we have to be aware of kind of the different impacts of that. And no doubt, I think that we have these pendulum swings in regulatory and regimes, and hopefully we'll see this shift away from what it's been. But we'll see, I think, policymakers that might be more open to kind of. And I mean, that said, even some of the policymakers that have been around in a variety of political perspectives, I think all of them do care about mental health. Like I will say that there's just different, like I think people have different means to the different goals. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I was going to say one more thing, because in your comment, Linda, you had said like 1099 contract employees. And, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I just wanted to kind of put something forth that as just like a comment and a reflection of what's happening in our larger society is that not everybody wants to work for a corporation. Not everybody wants to work for a group. People, we get our independent license so that we can practice independently, whatever that means for us. And for a lot of us, and I include myself in this, I don't want to work for a big entity. I like working for myself. I like having my freedom. And 1099 contract is not necessarily a bad thing because it allows you to, no one can tell you when you work, how much you work. And so if you're being paid fairly, that is not necessarily a bad thing. You now have your own business. You can write off all of your the incredible expenses that we have, your license, your liability, the training that you go to. If you have to go to a massage, get massage, because you're sitting all day, get a chiropractor, like all the things that we need to use to keep ourselves as an instrument in good working order. Those are all, write offable expenses. And so I just see what's happening is that, it's like there's a push to like the corporatization of everything. We're with the involvement of AI, human beings are just reduced to like cogs on a wheel. And I remember when I was in college, I took a sociology of work class, and it was all about, and this was like in the 90s, but this was all about how, you know, really we're all like kind of industrialization makes us all serve the larger corporate entity that, whatever that is. And that's kind of what we're seeing is that, do we really want to live like that? Do we really? And so I just want to like just be thoughtful about how we approach our work, how we use AI to support our work, because at the end of the day we are the creative beings. We don't want to offload creativity. We want to offload the administrative, the bureaucratic things that we do. And so just recognizing and being awake to the fact that our whole society is trying to just really commoditize every profession, every individual, just to serve the greater, corporate good. So
Yeah.
I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge of different systems, right? Like that, again, this is a slight tangent, but it's like you look at the egg problem in the US. Part of the issue that we have is all of these things are in these huge mega factories where we have like 1,000 hen laying eggs, versus like in Canada, they have like 25,000 in each of these like warehouses, and they happen to be not free range because it gets really cold there. And they haven't had any problems with the eggs. And it's this, I think it's the reminder of what literally happens when you have too many eggs in one basket, and kind of the challenge within our systems in the US are very much centered around like kind of creating the biggest thing, and that sometimes isn't necessarily better. So I want to make sure that we address questions that people have. I see a lot of people.
Yeah,
Let's see.
there's another question about I was told that 1099 contractors don't own the client. You cannot take them with you if you don't own the relationship. First of all, no one owns clients, right? So any entity, any group should have a policy where if you give adequate leave, that you can then take your clients with you. If you work for a hospital system, for example, as long as you're giving yourself along with two or three other referrals, you're being ethical in terms of referring to yourself. People have that choice. In a
And
private
different
practice,
places do that different ways. It's important to look at contracts to see the specifics of how each place does that, because every place is different.
every place is different, and it's important. And there's a lot of things, a lot of unethical things that are being done in groups that are, you really need to question. Like I've seen contracts that say you can't, if you when you leave a group practice, you can't start your own practice for 2 years within 30 miles of that practice. That is completely ridiculous. But if it is a group practice that has corporate backing, they have attorneys and they could technically maybe try to enforce that. No small group practice is going to have that kind of policy. Like at Plumeria, we have a 60-day leave policy. If you give a 60 days notice, you can take your clients with you. I mean,
Yeah, and I think it's important I'll also say one quick point to that, being a group practice owner as well. It's like that 60 days is so important for us to be able to plan. It's, truly to be able to look at kind of like, all right, we need to do hiring. How do we do the transition in a mindful way for, you and for clients, and talking through that so that it's not something that's haphazard. Because when that happens, in the corporate world of 2 weeks, that may work, but in our world, it can be really jarring and a problem. And so that's something that we, like practice owners, try and do. It's important for anybody that's looking at group practice places to compare, like to look at different contracts and look at the specifics of it. Like one potential gotcha could be a place that has a thing. If you leave, before a certain time, that they may charge some kind of administrative fee for photography and insurance broke things and things like that. I haven't seen that come up a lot, but that's the only like potential thing that I've seen come up. I know of. I knew of a place that did that, but there's only one place that I know that did that. So those are little things to look at on that side. Anyway, I feel like that's getting off of the AI conversation, so I want to make sure that we're addressing the other questions that are here.
yeah, well, it's all part of a piece, right?
Yeah.
Um, let's see what else we have here.
So more stuff about that's funny that all this stuff is coming about
Yeah,
W2.
well, we're here for it.
Yeah, so W2 versus 1099, there are different practices that look at that different ways. I mean, ultimately, it's like I know for us, we ended up switching everything to W2 because that was the advisement that we had from our CPA and the lawyer that helped us to create all of our stuff. And it means that like we can offer benefits and like, retirement benefits like 401k and healthcare and things like that. It means that ultimately the employer is also, instead of you paying your self-employment taxes, the company is like basically paying half of that. So normally you'd be paying around 15% on your own for the self-employment stuff. The company is paying like a 7% ish share of that, um, and as well as other stuff. It ultimately means there's more responsibility that falls on the employer for like we have to do all of the liability insurance and just a variety of things of and the reason why we were advised in that direction was just, and this is actually the area where Headway and Alma may like fall into problems, is they certainly look like an employer when they have them listed on their website. They have like all of this different stuff being marketed as Headway instead of like, Billy Schroeder, independent practice person. It's all falling into that. And the more like all it would take is for like, well, there's litigation that's pending, but somebody could go and sue and basically have like a workers' comp claim, and then that goes into the system and then works its way up. Just because there's been a lot of problems around like Headway, not just Headway and Alma, but the Uber and all of these other things that are demanding people work certain hours, do all
Right.
this stuff, drive an Amazon truck, all of these things. But then, hey, they're not Amazon. You're on your own if you have any problems. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. The 1099 comes with freedom. I mean, that's the main difference. No one should be telling you when to work, how to work, um, how many hours to work, other than like, a bare minimum.
yeah,
They really shouldn't be dictating any of that.
yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a variety of
Let me
different
see what
differences
else
out
we
there.
have here. Any other questions? We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, so there was a question about Gemini and Google Workspace, and it's like somebody put the instructions for turning it off. It is on by default. It was something that they did as a move to try and like feed themselves more data, even though it is under your BAA. Primarily, it's like an option to be able to enable in Google Meet calls. It is also an option for like responding in emails. It's quite comical to me how like bad it is, to be honest. It's like there's all these simple like gains that they could have had years ago of like, hey, there's this appointment that's coming up, do you want this to be in your calendar? And it doesn't automatically do things like that. And like ironically, Google's support is also terrible in not implementing their own AI, so it's not encouraging. So um
Yeah.
yeah, and we're just seeing more and more different stuff come in that way. It's like there's a Brillium, which is a thing that automatically goes and reviews like a huge amount of like case notes for different large companies like LifeStance and stuff like that. There's these virtual like schedulers that are coming online that are AI that like talk to somebody like a real human. And, it's basically kind of the evolution of, I think, the larger companies that are going and having outsourced call centers anyway, like, to the Philippines and whatever. They're starting to use these things because it's like 7 cents a minute, and that's way cheaper than the other stuff, and they can handle multiple calls at once. So anyway, there's a lot of different ways that AI is being utilized within the healthcare space, and we're only going to see more of it.
All right. Well, this
Does
was a really
anybody
good
else?
discussion. I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, I mean, if there's questions, if there's interest, we could do a conversation around 1099 and W-2 in the future if there are more people that have questions around that and kind of the differences of that, just because there are a lot of differences. And inevitably, you and I talk a lot about practice stuff and how people run those practices. And like ultimately, that may be something that's helpful for people to understand what's a better fit for them too. So whether they're starting their own group practice or like wanting to work somewhere else.
Yeah, and Billy, if you could put your email, it was on the last slide, but maybe put your email in the chat. But we're always open if anyone has additional questions. And I do a presentation just on things to consider when joining a group practice that I've done for different groups. So
We have a question about the CEUs.
yes, it's an hour and a half CEU. It's 1.5 hours. That's how long we've been here. So and it's not ethics. It's just I don't believe it's ethics. And no, none of those considerations. Just flat 1.5 CEUs. And Laura put information on how to access your evaluation in the chat. So go ahead and look for that and make sure that you fill that out in order to get your CEU. And I also asked her to send it out to all the attendees just because it's hard to access while if you're on a computer.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the recording right now.